Today's lesson is Module 2, Lesson 10, the distributive property and the products of decimals. Remember that word products means to multiply. So today we're going to be talking about multiplying decimals. There are a few things that we're going to talk about before we get started in the lesson. The first thing is I'm going to introduce you to the vocabulary word partial products. And a partial product is the process of multiplying parts of a number by place value. And before I get into the example, I'm going to give you another vocabulary term, and it's called distributive property. And this is the process of where we use multiplication, and multiplication is applied to addition of two or more numbers inside of parentheses. So now I'm going to give you a very simple example just so I can break down what both of those things mean, and then we're going to talk about some rules of multiplying decimals. So for example, if I have the number 12 times 15, if this is my expression that I need to simplify, if I'm going to use partial products, then I'm going to split one of the numbers by place value. So I will be splitting this 12, and if I'm splitting it by place value, then I'm going to think of what two places it actually uses to make up its number. So it has a 1 in the tens place, so that means I have 10, and it has a 2 in a 1 place, plus 2 ones. That makes up the number 12, and I'm multiplying that by 5. Remember that a number next to parentheses means to multiply. You don't actually have to put that multiplication symbol in there. So now this is where distributive property comes into play with using partial products. Because what I'm actually going to do is I'm going to apply this times 5 times the 10. And so it will now look like this. Inside parentheses, 10 times 5. And I'm not doing away with any of my operation symbols. So my plus sign will come here next. And then I'm going to apply this multiply times 5 to the 2. So then it becomes 2 times 5. So once I get the products of those two, then I'm going to add them together. So 10 times 5 is 50. And then I keep my plus sign. And 2 times 5 is 10. And now I'm going to add 50 plus 10, which gives me 60. So 60 is the answer. So now we're going to talk about some rules of multiplying decimals. And we're just going to say rules to follow when multiplying decimals. And you probably remember these rules from earlier grades. So the first rule is to ignore the decimals. Step 2 is to multiply. Step 3 is to count. Decimal places in the algorithm. So an algorithm is the problem that you're solving. And number 4 is put the decimal in the answer with the same number of places, counting from the right. So now we're going to do 2 examples. Example number 1 is if there's just one decimal in the problem. So if I have 126 times 3.2, my step 1 was to ignore the decimals. So I'm going to pretend like this decimal's not even here. I'm going to multiply. So 2 times 6 is 12. Regroup my 1. 2 times 2 is 4, plus 1 more gives me 5. 2 times 1 is 2. Put in my placeholder because now I'm done with my 1s. I'm going to go to my 10s. 3 times 6 is 18. Put down my 8. Regroup my 1. 3 times 2 is 6, plus 1 more is 7. And then 3 times 1 is 3. Now I have to add all of this up. 2 plus 0 is 2. 5 plus 8 is 13. Regroup my 1. 1 plus 2 is 3, plus 7 more is 10. Regroup my 1. 1 plus 3 is 4. Now, my next step says to count the decimal places in the algorithm. So I can see that in my algorithm, I only have one number behind a decimal. So when I go down to my answer to put in I'm counting from the right, and I only have one place, so this is where my decimal goes. Now I'll show you an example where you have a decimal in both parts in the algorithm. So if I have 2 73 hundredths times 2 4/10. I'm going to just ignore my decimals and just multiply. 4 times 3 is 12. Regroup my 1. 4 times 7 is 28, plus 1 more is 29. Regroup my 2. 4 times 2 is 8, plus 2 more is 10. Put in my placeholder because I'm finished with my 1s and now multiplying by my 10s place. 2 times 3 is 6. 2 times 7 is 14. Regroup my 1. 2 times 2 is 4, plus 1 more is 5. Add all of this together. 2 plus 0 is 2. 9 plus 6 is 15. Regroup my 1. 1 plus 0 is 1, plus 4 more is 5. And 5 plus 1 is 6. Now I have to go up into my algorithm and count how many places. I have 1, 2, 3. So if I start here and I count over 1, 2, 3 places, then that's where my decimal will go. So now let's go ahead and take out your book, and we are going to start with lesson 10 classwork. It's on page S43 in your book. And this very first part, it says to calculate the product. Anytime I see this word calculate, I'm going to just go ahead and get out my calculator, and I'm going to type in the problem, which is 200 times 32.6, and that equals 6,520. And for my next one, to clear this out, I'm going to do 500 times 22 and 12 tenths, and that gives me 11,060. So that seems pretty simple. Now we are going to talk about how we can apply those practices that we just did in our notebook of using partial products and distributive property. Break down those problems that we just calculated in a calculator. So the first one we're going to do is 200 times 36, and it says use partial products and the distributive property to calculate the product. So this time, because they're giving me specific instructions, I'm not going to calculate using a calculator. So the first thing I'm going to do is break apart this 32.6 using its place value. So I know that the 32 is my whole number, and then I'm adding in the 6/10. So this is how I'm going to get my partial products, and I'm going to multiply that by 200. So now, using distributive property, I know that the first thing I'm going to do is be multiplying 200 times 32. Then I'm going to add that to 200 times 6/10. And don't forget to keep that decimal point. It's going to be very important when we're calculating this information. So I'm going to get out my calculator now, and I'm going to just punch in these two problems. So I have 200 times 32, and I get 6,400. Keep my addition sign. Then I'm going to do 200 times 0.6, and this time I get 120. So now all I need to do is add these two together, So 6,400 plus 120 equals 6,520. That's my answer. So this first part shows my partial products. And then this is my distributive property. The next example is similar to the array model that you're probably used to. This time it says use partial products and distributive property to calculate the rectangular patio that's shown. So we're going to use partial products and distributive property. And this time I'm going to model what that would look like for you if I were to write it on this. So my problem here is actually 22 and 1200 times 500. So the number that I'm going to be splitting using partial products is my 22 and 1200. So I would actually, because this short side is what is being split, I'm actually going to split how that would look here. So this bottom part would make up my 200 because, or I'm sorry, my 22, because that makes up the bigger part of my number, my whole number. And this little part makes up my part of a number, which is my 1200ths. So when I write this, I'm going to write 22 plus 1200 times 500. And then I'm going to distribute that 500 to each part. So it's 22 times 500 plus 0.12 times 500. Then I'm going to get out my calculator and calculate that together. So I have 22 times 500, which gives me 11,000. Then I'm going to add that to 0.12 times 500, and that gives me 60. And then I add those two together. So I have 11,000 plus 60, and that gives me 11,060. Now I have to, because this is a problem and we're using feet, I'm going to say square feet, because we were doing area and we know area always means square. So now the rest of your assignment is, when you turn to the next page, it says use the boxes below, work for each station. Make sure you are putting the solution of each station in the correct box. So you are actually going to pick 2 problems from the board and then check with Miss Parker. Because after you've worked through some, if I see that you are able to set it up and understand how we use partial products and distributive property, I'll be able to give you the next part of your assignment. If you have any questions, feel free to come and see me, or let me know that you have a question. When you get to the problem set, you are going to be working 1 through 5. make sure you're showing all your work, you have plenty of room on your paper, and then pick up your exit ticket.